afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another Propagandacast Lehr with me, your host, Imperial Dame. We're off here to have a look at the Stuka half-track here. It's a Rakettenwerfer with the 6 big rockets available to the Oberkommando West from the Mechanized Regiment headquarters. It costs a nice 390 manpower and 100 fuel, and is thus somewhat expensive, though more or less about, in fact, more expensive than the other rocket launching options, though actually early available depending on how you play, though I would not advise rushing straight for it. It's a pretty unique, of course. I mean, it, like every other Oberkommandoist vehicle, it's got 5 levels of veterancy. It has a bunch of veterancy abilities, though most of them actually focus on basically decreasing the rate of fire, which are also the most important ones. Basically after that, it really doesn't actually do much for it. And the 4th one, well, I've actually never seen it used. In fact, I've never actually seen it go to veterancy 3. So that's a smaller detail, I suppose, but again, you know, the first 2 levels of veterancy are essentially what you want, and the rest doesn't really matter anyways, largely. It is, of course, rather unique because it fires its rocket in a more creeping barrage mode compared to every other rocket launch, which basically just fires the rockets in a larger mess, hoping for something to hit. And that, of course, rather changes how you actually use it, how you get something out. Also note it has a machine gun on top, a bit like the Panzerwerfer, so it does possess some lighter anti-infantry sort of protection there, or can you send them running a bit. But again, it's a creeping barrage. Basically means, for starters, you can actually target sort of more specifically how it goes. It's more of a narrow strip of rockets, though there's still a bit of spread, so it's a lot more controlled compared to any other barrage. You can also choose the direction, which means, for example, say, and again we'll just use this as an example, we've got a huge army here. You might say, okay, I'll fire a rocket series here, and of course you expect, well, he's probably going to try and retreat. He might, though, and then a basic attack from here, basically mean he will have to run into the rockets. If you play it correctly, of course, it won't always work, but in theory you can pull it off. It also means that, say, your opponent has something hidden behind a building. Normally, the building, well, for example, if you fire from south, you know, you'd hit the building a lot. Common little trick there. But instead, you could actually creep the barrage so it hits it from the other side, so actually ignoring the structure and the cover it provides. So in that regard, it's a rather unique ability with a lot of little neat advantages, but it's also got some severe disadvantages because of that. I mean, for starters, it has a longer cooldown than any of the other barrages, I believe, but there's another sort of particular bit to it. And then again, it's because of its strength. It's also very weakness. It's basically a double-edged sword, because while it can sort of devastate a much more concentrated area with basically much greater accuracy, at the same time it also basically means you can't fire in the blind, because you're a lot less likely to hit something, because just as it can actually hit a lot more, it can also miss a lot more, because again, say you just fired a barrage at huge cover infantry, you know, oh hey, there's a chance something hits, but if you fire here and you just basically miss by even a bit, you're going to end up hurt. Firing by nothing, so there we go. Firing a barrage. In this case, I'm actually firing blindly. I have no idea what's going on. And again, no. Not that much time. In this case, I actually got a bit lucky, but I could also easily end up hitting absolutely nothing. So, I mean, firing this thing blindly is a lot less of an option than with any other rocket barrage weapon, because, again, they are very much basically about saturating an area with rockets without necessarily caring so much about what you know in it. The Stuka, not quite so much. I mean, that's really more in sort of the direction of howitzers and the likes. You very much want to be able to see where the target is before you begin unleashing a large payload of rockets down their throats. Failure to do that, of course, again, you can end up basically hitting absolutely nothing. So when using this Stuka, reconnaissance is so much more important than with any other artillery piece. You really want to know if your opponent is there or if he isn't. But again, when you then do fire, you can also unleash a lot more sort of punishment, damage, and such. So in that regard, it's in some regards, when it comes to success and failure, it's a lot more extreme than the other rocket launchers, I think. Because you could really end up basically hitting nothing at all, even say you might be firing into large movement. And again, that's actually another thing, it's actually easy to dodge. If your opponent figures out the direction, and again, in some cases, you know, hunters will be a bit tricky with it. I mean, he can basically just say, oh, I'll just move to the right. And that basically means he's trying to rocket payload, but it's wasted, because again, it's incredibly easy to dodge if your opponent figures out what direction you're taking. So it's a bit tricky. Like, I mean, it's not super straightforward in that regard either, but it can be figured out. Unlike any other barrage in that sense, you know, it can be figured out. So in that regard, it can also be easier sort of avoided if you're not careful. So it's very much something to keep in mind as well while using it. And also while fighting against it. But again, if you know where your opponent is, if you know what he's doing, you can usually get off a nice, strong barrage, sort of really devastating infantry and support weapon positions. Which is really sort of what you want to aim for. It can also quite handily knock down an entire building, because again, you'll basically concentrate all the rockets in one go, leaving your opponents quite in tears. Quite in tears. I wish I could sort of, you know, advise on the incendiary rockets, but I've never seen the ability to use them. I mean, it takes tons of kills to actually get anywhere. And I don't really think you're going to get to that level, not even level 3, unless you're basically playing in a larger team game, in which case, you know, I think that's going to be less of a priority. My best case is basically going to be an area denial weapon of some power, but beyond that, there is nothing particular to it. That's rather what I'd put there. Of course, it can also be used in another little neat manner. For example, say your opponent is attacking, say like this, you know, advancing in a wall snipe broad sweep. You can do this. You can basically target along the axis where it's sort of moving, and well, completely wipe out his infantry advance. That is very much one way of doing it. I mean, again, it's a weapon that allows for a lot more creative usage, a lot more skill in some regards, but it's also one that punishes the user a lot harder if he's not very careful with it. But again, it does reward much more amply, as this large segment of American soldiers screaming and writhing in pain, holding their kidneys, as if though some kind of large rocket force crushed it with a massive shockwave. So I think that rather covers the Stuka and how you can sort of use it, how to sort of avoid it. Again, if you can sort of figure things out, you know, or at least ensure your opponent has a chance of really seeing you, I mean, it can be a lot less effective than otherwise. Also note, it's actually quite weak, so a few shots there basically from a tank, say 2, and it's wrecked. So those are rather the details on it. Generally get it if you're dealing with a lot of infantry, support weapons, the likes of an entrenched opponent. Get the Stuka. If he's got a lot of tanks, for example, don't bother. And of course, always try to keep it covered by something, you know, so your opponent can't directly rush at it, because he will want to rush at it and knock it out, or sneak up on it and knock it out. I mean, it's going to be a high priority target, so be mindful when using it. So I think that rather covers it. Thanks for watching. Hope you learned, hope you enjoyed, hope you got some ideas how to use it and fight against it. This is Imperial Dane saying cheers.